I found out my daughter sold my beach house the same day I learned she'd already sold her vintage car, the one I gave her for her wedding. The betrayal hit me like a slap on a bitter February morning in Chicago, cold, shocking, and cruel. I never saw it coming. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 72, I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak life could offer. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your chest feel hollow and your hands shake when you're trying to hold your morning coffee steady. My days in my lonely apartment on the 15th floor overlooking Lake Michigan had become an exhausting blur of silence and aching memories. The wind off the lake rattled my windows that February morning, and I sat surrounded by faded photographs scattered across my small dining table. There was the old beach house framed in golden sunlight from last summer. There was Sarah's radiant smile beside that beautiful 1965 Mustang convertible, cherry red with white racing stripes. The same car I had given her on her wedding day 3 years ago, the same car my late husband had restored with his own hands in our garage. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. The smell of it, once my favorite comfort, now seemed bitter and forgotten. I kept staring at my phone, waiting for something. Anything. A text. A call. Some sign that I mattered to the people I had given everything to. I had sent Sarah a message that morning. Just a simple question, "Honey, are you coming to visit this weekend like we talked about?" The little bubble showed it had been read 2 hours ago. No reply. Just silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any argument ever could. Weeks before, she had casually mentioned something about getting rid of the house to ease her financial burden. I had laughed it off then, remembering all those summer nights when the house was filled with laughter and the smell of my famous blueberry pancakes drifting from the kitchen. That little house in Michigan had been our sanctuary. Our place. The place where 3 generations of our family had made memories that I thought were precious to everyone. But sitting there that morning, staring out at the gray waters of Lake Michigan, the contrast between what I had hoped for and the bitter reality left me gasping for air. The silence felt like drowning. The emptiness felt like disappearing one piece at a time. I didn't know yet that by the end of that day, everything I thought I understood about my family would crumble like sand between my fingers. I didn't know that the daughter I had sacrificed everything for had already made decisions that would change both our lives forever. And I certainly didn't know that I had made a decision of my own that would shock her just as much. But let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you about the years of giving, the decades of sacrifice, and the slow, painful realization that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just a transaction. And I had been paying the price for far too long. As far back as I can remember, I gave everything to my family. Everything. My dreams, my health, my savings, my peace of mind. I sacrificed it all on the altar of what I believed was unconditional love. But looking back now, I wonder if it was really love, or if it was just fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being seen as selfish. When Sarah was little, I worked 2 jobs to pay for her dance lessons and piano classes. When she was in high school, I took a second mortgage on our house to send her to that expensive arts camp she just had to attend. When she got married, I emptied my retirement savings to give her the wedding of her dreams. And when she and her new husband needed help with their down payment, I sold my mother's jewelry, pieces I had treasured for 40 years, to help them buy their first home. My son David was no different. "Mom, we need some help with the bills," he would say during his weekly phone calls. Never asking how I was doing. Never wondering if I could afford it. Just assuming that Mom would always be there, checkbook open, ready to solve whatever financial crisis had landed on his doorstep this time. And I always said yes. Every single time. Even when it meant eating pasta for weeks. Even when it meant skipping my own doctor appointments because I couldn't afford the copay. Even when it meant lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I was going to make my own rent. The pattern became so familiar it felt like breathing. Crisis call. Emergency request. Guilt trip if I hesitated even for a second. "Mom, you know we wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." "Mom, we're really struggling here." "Mom, we just need this one favor." But when I needed them. When I was sick with pneumonia last winter and called to ask if someone could bring me some groceries. "I can't, Mom, not now," Sarah snapped, her voice sharp with irritation. "I've got the kids' activities all day, and then we have dinner plans. Can't you just order something online?" The cold silence that followed hung between us like winter frost. It settled deep in my bones and never really left. I tried to tell myself they were just busy. Young families have so many demands. They didn't mean to sound so dismissive, so impatient. But deep down, a terrible thought began to take root and grow. Was I just a wallet to them? Just someone to be called when they needed money, then forgotten until the next crisis? My quiet forgiveness became a pattern, a leash that tightened slowly around my throat. I began to notice how the conversations went. How quickly they ended when I mentioned my own problems. How the subject always turned back to their needs, their struggles, their emergencies. "We're stressed, Mom. Can't you understand?" became their standard response to any complaint I might voice. As if their stress mattered more than mine. As if being their mother meant I had no right to my own feelings, my own needs, my own limits. I started keeping track without meaning to. 18 months since Sarah had visited. 10 months since David had called just to talk, without asking for anything. 3 years since either of them had remembered my birthday without me having to remind them. I often caught myself holding my breath, risking my own limited oxygen just to keep their fires burning. But what happens when the person doing all the giving starts to suffocate? What happens when the well runs dry? I was about to find out. The neglect started small, so small I almost missed it. Forgotten birthdays explained away with busy schedules and sincere apologies. Ignored text messages justified by work stress and family chaos. Cancelled visits blamed on sick kids or unexpected obligations. But then the pattern became impossible to ignore. My 70th birthday came and went without so much as a phone call. When I mentioned it a week later, Sarah's response was casual to the point of cruelty. "Oh, was that last week? Sorry, Mom. You know how crazy things get." When I fell on the ice outside my building and ended up in the emergency room with a sprained wrist and bruised ribs, I called both my children from the hospital. Sarah's phone went straight to voicemail. David answered but seemed annoyed by the interruption. "Are you okay?" "Okay, good. Look, Mom, I'm in the middle of something important at work. Can we talk later?" Later never came. Despite my worsening arthritis making simple tasks like opening jars and carrying groceries a daily struggle, no one offered to help. When I mentioned the constant pain in my hands and knees during our rare phone conversations, Sarah's response cut like a blade. "You're fine, Mom. It's just old age. Everyone gets aches and pains. Just old age." As if my pain didn't matter because it was expected. As if I should suffer in silence because that's what old people do. That phrase echoes in my mind even now. It demonstrates such casual dismissal, such complete lack of empathy. As if reaching 72 meant I had forfeited the right to compassion from my own children. But it was the discovery I made by pure accident that finally shattered whatever illusions I had left about my place in their lives. I was having trouble with my laptop, the Wi-Fi kept cutting out, and I couldn't figure out why. Sarah had stopped by briefly to pick up some old photo albums she wanted, and I asked if she could take a quick look at it before she left. While she was fiddling with the computer, her phone rang. She answered without thinking, forgetting I was standing right there. "Hey, babe," she said to her husband. "Yeah, I'm at Mom's place now, grabbing those albums. Did you hear back from the real estate agent about the final closing price?" My blood turned to ice water. Final closing price? What final closing price? Really? 30,000 more than we expected? That's fantastic. She laughed, the sound bright and excited. Mom's little beach house really paid off for us. I can't believe she just handed over the deed like that. Made the whole thing so much easier. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the back of my kitchen chair to keep from falling. She was talking about my beach house. My sanctuary. The place where her father and I had spent our 20th wedding anniversary. The place where she had played in the sand as a little girl. The place I had signed over to her name 3 years ago because she said she wanted to help maintain it and keep it in the family. She was selling it. Had already sold it. And I was hearing about it by accident, like some stranger eavesdropping on a private conversation. The buyer wants to tear it down and build something bigger, she continued, completely oblivious to my presence. Honestly, it was just a burden anyway. Too much maintenance, and we never used it. This way we can finally pay off David's credit cards and maybe even take that vacation to Europe we've been talking about. My legs gave out. I sank into the chair, trembling. The beach house had been a burden to her. The place that held decades of my most precious memories was just something to be sold off to pay for her husband's credit card debt and a European vacation. But here's the thing she didn't know. The thing I hadn't told her, hadn't told anyone. 3 months earlier, when David had called with another emergency, his mortgage was behind, and he was facing foreclosure, I had made a decision that I hadn't been able to bring myself to share. I had sold her vintage Mustang. The car I had given her for her wedding. The car my husband had lovingly restored. The car she had gushed over and promised to treasure forever. I had been storing it in a climate-controlled garage across town because she didn't have space for it at her house. She rarely drove it, rarely even asked about it. It just sat there, month after month, accumulating storage fees I could barely afford. When David called in tears, begging me to help him save his house, I looked at that car sitting under its protective cover and made a choice. I sold it to a collector for $18,000. Every penny went to David's mortgage company. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I told myself Sarah wouldn't mind, that helping her brother was more important than keeping a car she never drove. But really, I think I was testing something. Testing whether she would even notice. Testing whether it mattered to her at all. She never asked about it. Not once. Not in 3 months. And now she was on the phone, laughing about selling my house behind my back while standing in my kitchen, completely unaware that I had already sold her most valuable possession to save her brother from homelessness. My hands started shaking so hard I knocked over my favorite coffee mug, the blue ceramic one from that little lakefront diner where her father and I used to go every Sunday morning. It hit the floor and shattered, brown coffee spreading across the linoleum, ceramic pieces scattering like tiny white bones. The sound made Sarah turn around. She saw me there, pale and trembling, surrounded by the pieces of my broken mug, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe. Or recognition of what she had just said within my hearing. "Mom? Are you okay?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't speak. I just stared at the broken pieces at my feet and felt something inside me break just as completely. She ended her phone call quickly after that. Made some excuse about traffic and left without helping me clean up the mess. Left me alone with the shattered mug and the even more shattered remains of my illusions about our relationship. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Really cried. Not the silent tears I had grown used to, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from some hollow place in my chest I hadn't known existed. I packed away all the photo albums Sarah had come to collect. Stored them in boxes in my closet where they couldn't mock me with memories of happier times that apparently meant nothing to the people in them. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror for a long time, staring at a woman I barely recognized. When had I become so invisible? When had I become someone who could be lied to, manipulated, and discarded without a second thought? The thought of saying no began to echo in my mind. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like a language I had never learned to speak. But something about it also felt like hope. Like the possibility of breathing freely for the first time in decades. Yet fear stalked every one of those hopeful thoughts. Fear of loneliness. Fear of losing my family entirely. Fear of facing the rest of my life with no one who shared my memories, no one who needed me, no one who cared whether I lived or died. What I didn't know yet was that the worst was still to come. What I didn't know was that my journey through this particular hell had only just begun. But I also didn't know that buried somewhere deep in my broken heart, a different kind of strength was starting to grow. The kind of strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. The confrontation came exactly 1 week later. I had spent those 7 days in a strange kind of limbo, replaying Sarah's phone conversation over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of how we had gotten to this place. I kept thinking about the day I signed the beach house over to her name. We had been sitting in the lawyer's office, and I had explained my reasoning carefully. I want to make sure it stays in the family, I had told her. And this way, if something happens to me, you won't have to deal with probate or inheritance taxes. She had hugged me then, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Mom. This means so much to me. I promise I'll take good care of it. I promise it will always be our special place. Our special place. The irony was almost funny now. I didn't sleep much that week. I kept getting up at 3 or 4 in the morning, making coffee, sitting by my living room window watching Lake Michigan catch the first hints of dawn. I thought about calling her, demanding an explanation. I thought about calling David, asking if he knew what his sister was planning. I thought about calling a lawyer myself, asking if there was anything I could do to stop the sale. But mostly, I just sat in the silence and tried to figure out how to have a conversation I had never imagined needing to have with my own daughter. Finally, on a Thursday evening, I couldn't stand it anymore. I called her. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. Hey, Mom. What's up? I'm making dinner, so I can't talk long. Can't talk long. Even now, even for this, she was managing my time like I was some inconvenient interruption to her real life. Sarah, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. A pause. In the background, I could hear dishes clinking, the sound of her continuing to cook while we talked. Okay. Sure. What is it? Did you sell the beach house? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she cleared her throat. Mom, where did you hear that? Not a denial. Not an explanation. Just a question about where I had gotten my information, like I was some neighbor spreading gossip instead of the person who had actually owned the house. I heard you talking about it on the phone last week when you were here, I said. About the closing price and the buyer wanting to tear it down. Another long pause. Then, look, Mom, I can explain. So it's true. It's not what you think. We were going to tell you. When? The word came out sharper than I intended. When were you going to tell me? After you had already spent the money? After the new owners had already demolished it. Don't be dramatic, Mom. You never used it anymore anyway. It was just sitting there, costing money for maintenance and property taxes. This way, at least it's doing some good. Doing some good. Like erasing 30 years of family memories was somehow a public service. Sarah, I said slowly, you promised me that house would stay in the family. You looked me in the eye and promised. Things change, Mom. We have responsibilities you don't understand. David was about to lose his house. We have college tuition to think about for the kids. We have real problems that require real solutions. Real problems. As opposed to my fake problems, I assumed. You could have talked to me, I said. You could have asked. Asked what? Permission to solve our own family's financial crisis? Come on, Mom. You signed the house over to me. That means it was mine to do with as I saw fit. The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. Legal ownership apparently gave her the right to betray every promise she had ever made to me. Besides, she continued, it's not like you were using it for anything important. You haven't been there in 2 years. I hadn't been there because my arthritis made the 2-hour drive difficult, and I had been waiting for someone in the family to offer to go with me. Waiting for someone to suggest a weekend getaway together. Waiting for someone to show even the slightest interest in sharing that space with me. I had been waiting for exactly the kind of family togetherness that apparently meant nothing to any of them. Sarah, I said quietly, how much did you sell it for? What does that matter? How much? A reluctant sigh. $87,000. $87,000. For the house where I had spent my honeymoon. Where I had taught her to swim. Where 3 generations of our family had gathered every summer for barbecues and birthday parties and quiet evenings watching the sunset over the water. And where did that money go? I told you. David's mortgage, the kids' college funds, some credit card debt we needed to clear up. Responsible adult things, Mom. Responsible adult things. Like selling your mother's most precious possession without telling her wasn't the act of a responsible adult at all, but of a betrayer. That's when I told her about the car. Sarah, I said, my voice still unnaturally calm, I need to tell you something too. 3 months ago, when David called about his mortgage, I sold your Mustang. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. I sold it to a collector in Milwaukee for $18,000. Every penny went to save David's house. You what? Her voice was barely a whisper. I sold your car. The one I gave you for your wedding. The one you promised to treasure forever. Mom, you can't, you had no right, that was my car. The hypocrisy was stunning. My house could be sold without consultation because legal ownership trumped emotional promises. But her car, apparently, was different. It was my car originally, I reminded her. Your father restored it. I bought it, I insured it, I paid to store it all these months while it sat unused in that garage. And when your brother needed help, I made a decision to help him. But you didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me. No, I agreed. I didn't. Just like you didn't ask me about the house. Just like you didn't tell me you were selling it. The parallel hung between us like a blade. She could hear it too, the echo of her own logic turned back on her. That's different, she said finally. How? Because the house was mine. You gave it to me. And I gave the car to you too. But apparently, when family needs help, these things stop being about ownership and start being about what's right. That's what you just told me, isn't it? I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow. I could picture her pacing around her kitchen, trying to find some way to be the victim in this conversation. Mom, that car was worth more than $18,000. Much more. You have no idea what you've done. I have exactly the idea you just gave me, I said. Family first. Real problems requiring real solutions. Remember? The conversation ended badly. She hung up on me after accusing me of being spiteful and vindictive. After telling me I was getting old and confused and making poor decisions. After suggesting that maybe it was time to consider moving me into some kind of assisted living situation where I couldn't do any more damage. I sat in my chair for a long time after that call ended, staring out at the dark water of Lake Michigan. I wasn't confused. I wasn't making poor decisions out of spite. I was simply applying the same logic my children had been using on me for years, take what you need, justify it later, and let the person who gets hurt deal with their own feelings. The difference was, I had used the money to help someone else in the family. They had used their money to pay for a European vacation. But the real difference, the one that cut deepest, was that I had agonized over my decision for weeks before making it. I had lost sleep, questioned myself, worried about the consequences. They had made their decision and laughed about it on the phone, treating my most precious memories like trash to be hauled away. That night, for the first time in my adult life, I did something I had never done before. I stopped answering their calls. When David called the next morning, probably having heard from Sarah about our conversation, I let it go to voicemail. When Sarah called that evening, her voice tight with fury, I watched her name light up my phone screen and did nothing. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. Like stepping off a cliff, not knowing if I was falling to my death or learning to fly. The voicemails they left were exactly what I expected. David's was full of confused hurt. "Mom, what's going on? Sarah told me some crazy story about you selling her car? That doesn't sound like you at all. Call me back so we can talk about this like adults." Sarah's were progressively angrier. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just ignore us because you're upset. We need to work this out. Call me back." "Then, fine. If you want to act like a child, that's your choice. But don't expect us to chase after you forever." And finally, "You know what, Mom? Maybe this is for the best. Maybe we all need some space from this drama." Drama. That's what my pain had become to them. Drama. But it wasn't drama that had me digging through my closet that week, pulling out old photo albums and legal documents. It wasn't drama that had me making appointments with a lawyer and a financial advisor. It wasn't drama that had me finally starting to ask myself hard questions about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. It was clarity. Painful, unwelcome clarity about who I really was to the people I had loved most in the world. And slowly, very slowly, it was also something else. Something I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it. It was self-respect. Growing like a tiny, stubborn weed through the cracks in my broken heart. But my children weren't going to let me disappear into that clarity without a fight. They might not have wanted my presence, but they definitely wanted my resources. And when those resources were suddenly cut off, their reactions revealed everything I needed to know about what our relationship had really been built on. The calls started coming more frequently. David first, trying the gentle approach. "Mom, I'm really worried about you. This isn't like you at all. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should see a doctor." When that didn't work, he tried guilt. "The kids keep asking when grandma is coming to visit. What am I supposed to tell them? That their grandmother is punishing them because she's mad at their parents?" Sarah went straight to manipulation. "Fine, Mom. If you want to throw away our entire relationship over money, that's your choice. But don't come crying to me when you're sitting alone in that apartment with no one who cares about you." When I still didn't respond, they tried a coordinated approach. David would call from work, sounding professional and concerned. "Mom, we need to discuss your finances. Sarah told me about some of the decisions you've been making lately, and we're worried you might be getting confused about money matters." Then Sarah would call an hour later, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Hi, Mom. I hope you know we love you and we're only trying to help. Maybe we should all sit down together and talk about getting you some assistance with managing your affairs." Managing my affairs. Like I was some doddering old woman who couldn't balance a checkbook, instead of someone who had been managing their affairs for decades. But there was one person who saw through all of this, who recognized what was really happening. My neighbor Carol, a retired third-grade teacher who lived 2 doors down from me in the same building. Carol had been watching this unfold from the outside, and one Tuesday morning she knocked on my door with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. "Margaret," she said, settling into my living room chair like she belonged there, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've been worried about you." I almost laughed. Another person worried about me. But when I looked at Carol's face, I saw something different from what I had been hearing from my children. I saw genuine care, not calculation. "Worried how?" I asked. "Well, I know it's none of my business, but I couldn't help noticing that your kids have been calling the building manager, asking questions about your lease and whether you've been having any problems with confusion or memory issues." My blood ran cold. "They what?" "They called yesterday. Said they were concerned about your mental state and wondered if management had noticed any changes in your behavior." I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. They were trying to build a case for incompetence. Trying to create a paper trail that would support their claims that I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. "Margaret," Carol continued gently, "I've been your neighbor for 4 years. I see you every day when you walk to the mailbox, when you come back from the grocery store, when you sit by your window reading in the afternoons. You're one of the sharpest people I know. There's nothing wrong with your mind, and there's certainly nothing wrong with your memory. She leaned forward, her teacher instincts kicking in. What there is something wrong with is the way your children are treating you. And honey, you deserve so much better than what I've been witnessing. For the first time in weeks, someone was seeing me clearly. Not as a problem to be managed or a resource to be tapped, but as a person deserving of respect and kindness. I don't know what to do, Carol, I admitted. They're my children. They're the only family I have left. No, she said firmly. They're not your only family. Family isn't just blood, Margaret. Family is the people who show up for you, who respect you, who treat you like you matter. And from what I can see, your children stopped being your family a long time ago. Her words hit me like cold water. She was right. When had my children last shown up for me? When had they last treated me like I mattered? You know what real family looks like? Carol asked. It's Mrs. Patterson on the 8th floor bringing you soup when you were sick. It's Mr. Chen helping you carry your groceries when your arthritis was acting up. It's me, sitting here now, telling you that you deserve better. She was right. The people who had shown me genuine kindness, genuine care, weren't the ones who shared my DNA. They were the ones who shared my humanity. Carol, I said slowly, what would you do? If you were me? She didn't hesitate. I'd stop giving them power over my happiness. I'd stop answering their calls until they could talk to me with respect. And I'd start building the kind of life that makes me feel good about who I am, with or without them. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my bank and set up new accounts that only I could access. I called my lawyer and made new arrangements for my will that didn't automatically leave everything to children who had already spent their inheritance while I was still alive to see it. And I called the senior center that Carol had mentioned, asking about their volunteer programs. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what other people expected from me. It felt like learning to breathe all over again. But my children weren't finished with me yet. When subtle manipulation didn't work, when guilt trips failed to restore their access to my resources, they decided to try a more direct approach. They showed up at my door on a Saturday morning, both of them together, looking like a delegation arriving for peace talks. Except they hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to win. Mom, David said when I opened the door, we need to talk. I almost didn't let them in. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what they thought they could say that would fix this. I wanted to know how they planned to justify everything they had done. So I opened the door wider and stepped aside. They sat on my couch like they were in a business meeting. Sarah had a folder with her, legal documents of some kind. David had his laptop open, presumably with spreadsheets or financial analyses ready to present. Mom, Sarah began, we've been talking, and we think there might be some confusion about recent events. Confusion. There was that word again. We want to clear things up, David added. About the house, about the car, about all of it. I sat in my chair across from them and waited. I had learned the power of silence from years of being talked over. Now I was going to use it. The thing is, Sarah continued, we're worried that you might be having some difficulties processing complex financial information. It's totally normal at your age. Nothing to be embarrassed about. That's why we think it might be time to set up some systems to help you, David chimed in. Some assistance with managing your finances, making sure all your legal documents are in order, that kind of thing. I stared at them. My own children, sitting in my living room, trying to convince me I was incompetent so they could regain control of my money. We've already talked to an elder care attorney, Sarah said, pulling papers from her folder. These are just some preliminary documents that would give us legal authority to help you with financial decisions when you're not feeling clear about things. She slid the papers across my coffee table like she was offering me a gift. Of course, you'd still be in charge of your own life, David added quickly. This would just be a safety net. For your protection. My protection. Right. I looked at the documents without touching them. I could see enough to know what they were. Power of attorney forms. Documents that would give them the legal right to access my accounts, make decisions about my property, move me out of my home if they decided it was in my best interest. What happens to the beach house money? I asked quietly. They exchanged a glance. What do you mean? Sarah asked. The $87,000 you got for selling my house. If I sign these papers, what happens to that money? Another glance between them. Well, that money has already been allocated, David said carefully. It went to family expenses. Important things. My mortgage, the kids' education funds. The European vacation, I added. Sarah's cheeks flushed. That was just a small part of it. Most of it went to responsible investments. I see. And if I don't sign these papers? Mom, David said, leaning forward with what he probably thought was a caring expression, if you don't sign these papers, we're worried about what might happen to you. Living alone at your age, making impulsive financial decisions like selling Sarah's car. That wasn't impulsive, I said. That was calculated. Just like selling my house was calculated. It's different, Sarah snapped, losing her patience. I told you, that was my house. And that was my car. We were back to the circular logic that made my head spin. Their ownership justified anything they wanted to do. My ownership meant nothing if it interfered with their plans. Look, Mom, Sarah said, trying a different approach. Bottom line is, we're your children. We love you. We want what's best for you. But you're not making good decisions right now, and we can't just stand by and watch you hurt yourself. How am I hurting myself? You're isolating yourself from your family. You're making financial decisions based on emotion instead of logic. You're living alone when you could be in a nice community with other people your age who could help you if you needed it. A nice community. They meant a nursing home. They meant warehousing me somewhere I couldn't interfere with their plans anymore. I stood up slowly, my arthritis making the movement careful and deliberate. I walked to my kitchen and came back with a manila envelope I had prepared several days earlier. Since we're all being so honest about financial decisions, I said, I have something to show you too. I opened the envelope and pulled out bank statements, legal documents, and a letter from my financial advisor. These are my financial records for the past 5 years, I said, spreading them across the coffee table next to their power of attorney forms. Would you like to know what they show? David and Sarah leaned forward, suddenly very interested. They show that I have given you a combined total of $93,000 over the past 5 years. $48,000 to David for various emergencies and mortgage help. $45,000 to Sarah for wedding expenses, down payment assistance, and miscellaneous crises. I watched their faces carefully as the numbers sank in. They also show that my current savings account has $612 in it. My checking account has $43. The only reason I can afford rent and groceries is my Social Security check, which barely covers my basic expenses. Silence. Complete silence. So when you talk about protecting me from poor financial decisions, what exactly are you protecting me from? The decision to stop giving you money I don't have? The decision to finally say no to people who only call me when they need something? Mom, David said weakly, we didn't know things were that tight for you. You didn't ask. In 5 years of taking my money, neither of you ever asked if I could afford it. You just assumed the bank of Mom would always be open. I picked up their legal documents and held them out to them. Here's my answer to your power of attorney request. No. I will not sign documents giving you control over what little I have left. I will not move into a facility so you can sell my apartment and take that money too. And I will not pretend anymore that what we have is a loving family relationship when what it actually is financial exploitation. Sarah's composure finally cracked. Fine, she shouted, jumping up from the couch. Fine, Mom. If that's how you want to play this. If you want to be selfish and paranoid and throw away your whole family over money that we only spent trying to build good lives for your grandchildren, then that's your choice. It is my choice, I agreed calmly. But don't come crawling back to us when you realize what you've done. Don't call us when you're lonely. Don't expect us to drop everything and come running when you need help. I won't. David was still staring at the financial documents, his face pale. Mom, I had no idea. If I had known you were spending your last savings on US, you would have what? Refused the money? Suggested I keep it for my own emergencies? Or would you have just asked for smaller amounts? He couldn't meet my eyes. We both knew the answer. They left without saying goodbye. Sarah slammed the door so hard it rattled my living room windows. David lingered in the hallway for a moment, and I thought he might apologize, might ask to start over. Instead, he just shook his head and walked away. I sat in my quiet apartment afterward, surrounded by the scattered papers that documented the financial ruin of our relationship. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness, not yet. But peace. The peace that comes from finally telling the truth. The peace that comes from stopping a lie you've been living for so long you'd forgotten it was a lie. Carol knocked on my door an hour later. She had heard the raised voices through the thin walls and wanted to make sure I was okay. I'm fine, I told her, and meant it. I'm actually fine for the first time in years. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon light fade over Lake Michigan. Finally, she spoke. You know what my grandmother used to say? She said the hardest part of getting old isn't losing the people you love. It's discovering that some of the people you loved never really loved you back. Her words settled into the quiet space in my chest where my illusions used to live. But she also said something else, Carol continued. She said that once you stop wasting your love on people who don't deserve it, you finally have enough left over to love yourself. I looked at this woman who had become a true friend, who had shown me more genuine care in a few weeks than my own children had shown me in years. And I realized that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe family really wasn't about blood. Maybe it was about showing up. About caring without calculating. About loving without conditions. That night, I did something I hadn't done since I was young. I made plans that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. I got online and looked at senior center volunteer programs. I researched trips for people my age who wanted to travel but didn't want to go alone. I looked at community college classes that had always interested me but that I had never had time for because I was too busy solving other people's problems. For the first time in decades, I asked myself what I wanted. Not what I should want, not what would make other people happy, but what would make me feel alive and purposeful and valued. It was a terrifying and wonderful question to finally ask. But I still didn't know what was coming. I didn't know that my children's reaction to losing their power over me would be swift and cruel. I didn't know that the worst betrayal was still ahead of me. And I didn't know that it would also be the betrayal that finally set me completely free. The silence lasted 2 weeks. 2 blessed weeks of no emergency calls, no guilt trips, no requests for money I didn't have. I started to think maybe this was how it would be from now on. Maybe they would just fade out of my life the way I had apparently faded out of theirs years ago. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. I should have known that people who see you as a resource don't just let that resource walk away without a fight. The first sign of trouble came from an unexpected source, my landlord. Mrs. Patterson, he said when he called on a Tuesday afternoon. I hate to bother you, but I've been getting some calls about your lease. My stomach dropped. What kind of calls? Well, your daughter called yesterday. Said she was concerned about your mental state and wanted to know what our policies were regarding tenants who might be developing dementia or other cognitive issues. There it was. The next phase of their plan. If they couldn't convince me to sign power of attorney documents, they would try to convince other people that I was incompetent. She asked specifically about what steps we take when family members are concerned about a tenant's ability to live independently, he continued. I told her we don't discuss tenant information with anyone without proper legal documentation, but I thought you should know. Thank you for telling me, I managed. Mrs. Patterson, if you don't mind me saying, you've been one of our best tenants for 4 years. You pay your rent on time, you're quiet and respectful, and I've never had any concerns about your mental acuity. Whatever family issues you might be dealing with, I want you to know that your tenancy is secure. After I hung up, I called Carol. She came down immediately. They're trying to build a case, I told her. They're calling my landlord, probably calling my doctor next, trying to create evidence that I'm incompetent. Why? She asked. What do they gain if you're declared incompetent? The answer was so obvious I almost couldn't say it out loud. Control. If they can convince a court that I'm not capable of managing my own affairs, they can get legal guardianship. They can access my Social Security, sell my apartment, move me into state-funded housing, and pocket the difference. But you only have $600 in savings. They don't know that. And even if they did, my Social Security check is $1,800 a month. Over a year, that's more than $20,000 they could control. Plus whatever they could get for my apartment and my few valuables. Carol stared at me in horror. They're trying to steal your entire life. Yes. I think they are. That's when she told me something that changed everything. Margaret, my nephew is a lawyer. Specializes in elder law. Would you be willing to talk to him? I can't afford a lawyer, Carol. Just talk. Let him explain your options. Knowledge is power, and right now, you need all the power you can get. I met with Carol's nephew, Michael, the next day. He was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who specialized in protecting seniors from exactly the kind of abuse I was experiencing. This is more common than you might think, he told me after I explained the situation. Adult children who see their aging parents as financial resources rather than people deserving of respect and care. But they're my children, I said. Doesn't that give them some rights? Being related to you gives them no legal rights over your person or your property unless you give those rights to them, or unless a court determines you're incompetent to make your own decisions, he explained. And based on our conversation, you're clearly competent. So what can they actually do? They can petition the court for guardianship, but they would need to prove you're incapable of caring for yourself. They can continue to pressure third parties like your landlord or your doctor, trying to create a paper trail of concerns about your mental state. And they can make your life very difficult through harassment and manipulation. What can I do to protect myself? That's when Michael outlined a plan that felt both terrifying and empowering. I could document everything: the financial history of their requests, the sudden cessation of contact when money stopped flowing, their attempts to undermine my independence. I could set up safeguards to protect my finances and my legal autonomy. And if necessary, I could pursue a restraining order if their harassment escalated. But here's the most important thing, he said. You can choose how much access they have to your life. You don't owe them your money. You don't owe them your compliance. You don't owe them anything except what you choose to give. Walking home from that meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: agency. The power to make my own choices about my own life. I also felt something else: anger. Pure, clean anger at the people who had tried to convince me I was losing my mind when what I was actually doing was finding my courage. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to beat them at their own game. Over the next several days, I quietly gathered documentation of everything. Every check I had written to them over the years. Every emergency call that had resulted in money changing hands. Every promise they had made and broken. Every dismissive comment about my age or my capabilities. I also started recording our phone conversations. Michael had explained that in Illinois, I only needed one party's consent to record a call, and I was certainly giving my own consent. It didn't take long for them to provide me with exactly the evidence I needed. Sarah called on a Friday evening, her voice saccharine with fake concern. "Mom, I hope you know we love you and we're worried about you. Hiding from your family isn't healthy. It's one of the early signs of cognitive decline." I let her talk, the recording device capturing every word. "We've been talking to people who know about these things, and they all say the same thing. When elderly people start making irrational financial decisions and isolating themselves from family, it's usually because they're starting to lose their grip on reality. Irrational financial decisions. Like refusing to fund their vacation with my grocery money. The kindest thing we can do is get you some help before you hurt yourself or someone else." Hurt someone else. What exactly did she imagine I was going to do with my dangerous 60-year-old Honda and my terrible bank balance? David and I have been researching facilities that specialize in memory care. There are some really nice places that aren't too expensive, and your Social Security would cover most of the cost. Of course it would. They had already figured out how to monetize my mental decline. "We just want what's best for you, Mom. I hope you can understand that." When she finished talking, I said something that clearly surprised her. "Sarah, I want you to know that I'm recording this conversation." Silence. "And I want you to know that I've documented every dollar I've given you and David over the past 5 years, including the car I sold to save his house and the house you sold for your vacation money." More silence. "And I want you to know that I've spoken with a lawyer who specializes in elder abuse, and he's very interested in our situation." "Mom, I'm not confused, Sarah. I'm not losing my grip on reality. I'm just finally seeing reality clearly for the first time in years. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. I understand that you and David have been financially exploiting me for years. I understand that when I stopped giving you money, you decided to destroy my reputation and my independence so you could take legal control of what little I have left." The silence stretched so long I thought she had hung up. "But most importantly," I continued, "I understand that I have choices. And I'm choosing to protect myself from people who see me as a commodity instead of a person. Mom, please, don't call me again unless you're ready to apologize and change how you treat me. And don't contact my landlord, my doctor, or anyone else in my life trying to convince them I'm incompetent. Because now I have evidence of everything you're doing, and elder abuse is a crime in Illinois." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. From adrenaline. From the intoxicating experience of finally standing up for myself. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. Instead of backing down, instead of reflecting on their behavior and possibly apologizing, my children decided to escalate. They went nuclear. The call came from David 3 days later. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with what sounded like barely controlled rage, "we need to talk about your behavior." "What behavior?" "This whole victim act you're doing. This paranoid fantasy about elder abuse and recording phone calls. It's embarrassing." "Embarrassing? To whom?" "You know what's really embarrassing, David? Having to explain to people why our mother has completely lost touch with reality. Having to tell our friends and neighbors that you've become so paranoid and delusional that you think your own children are trying to steal from you." The word hit like a physical blow. Delusional. "I want you to know that we've talked to Dr. Henderson's office." Dr. Henderson was my primary care physician. My stomach clenched. We explained the situation, told them about your sudden personality changes, your irrational suspicions, your isolation from family. They said they'd make a note in your file to watch for signs of dementia during your next appointment. You had no right. We had every right. We're your children, and we're concerned about your health. When you start accusing your family of crimes, when you start making wild claims about being exploited, when you start recording phone calls like some kind of crazy person, that's a sign that something is seriously wrong with your mental state. I was so angry I could barely speak. David. And frankly, Mom, we're done enabling this behavior. We're not going to pretend your delusions are reasonable just to spare your feelings. We're going to do what's necessary to protect you from yourself, whether you like it or not. The threat was clear. They were going to have me declared incompetent, whether I cooperated or not. We've already started the process, he continued. We've filed a petition with the court requesting a competency evaluation. You'll be getting served papers soon. The room spun around me. They had actually done it. They had actually taken legal action to have me declared mentally incompetent. This is your last chance, Mom. You can make this easy on yourself by agreeing to get the help you obviously need, or you can fight it and make things harder for everyone. But either way, this is going to happen. I hung up on him. For a long moment, I sat in my chair, staring out at Lake Michigan, trying to process what had just happened. My own children had just declared war on my independence, my autonomy, my basic human dignity. They were trying to destroy my life to get access to my social security check. But as the shock wore off, something else took its place. Not despair. Not fear. Fury. Pure, righteous fury at the people who thought they could steal my life and convince everyone it was for my own good. I called Michael immediately. They've filed for guardianship, I told him. I expected they might. Are you ready to fight? Yes, I said without hesitation. I'm ready to fight. What I didn't know was that I was about to need every ounce of fight I could muster. Because the worst betrayal, the one that would nearly break me completely, was still to come. The legal papers arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked embarrassed to be serving a competency petition to a clearly lucid 72-year-old woman. The petition was breathtaking in its cruelty. My children had painted a picture of a delusional, paranoid, financially irresponsible woman who posed a danger to herself and others. They claimed I had been making irrational financial decisions, isolating myself from family, and showing signs of severe cognitive decline. They had included statements from people I barely knew, neighbors who supposedly had concerns about my behavior, shopkeepers who apparently had noticed me acting confused and disoriented. The picture they painted was of a woman teetering on the edge of complete mental collapse. None of it was true, but it was all carefully crafted to sound believable to a court that didn't know me. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare for a legal battle that would determine whether I retained the right to control my own life. Michael assured me we had a strong case. The financial records clearly showed a pattern of exploitation by my children, not irresponsible spending on my part. The recordings of their phone calls demonstrated their real motivations. And most importantly, I was clearly competent to testify on my own behalf. But having a strong case and winning are two different things, especially when the other side is willing to lie and manipulate to get what they want. I was about to learn just how far they were willing to go. The first sign of trouble came during my appointment with Dr. Henderson. I had been seeing him for 3 years, and he had never expressed any concerns about my mental acuity. But when I walked into his office for my routine checkup, his manner was different. Cooler. More clinical. Mrs. Patterson, he said, flipping through my chart, I understand there have been some family concerns about your cognitive function. There have been family concerns about my bank account, I corrected. Not my cognitive function. He made a note. Can you tell me what year it is? I stared at him. Are you seriously going to give me a mental status exam because my children want control of my social security check? I'm just being thorough. What year is it? It's 2023, Dr. Henderson. It's October 15th, 2023, to be exact. I'm here for my annual physical, not because I'm confused about reality. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. He asked me to remember 3 words and repeat them back to him 5 minutes later. He asked me questions about current events and basic math problems. I answered everything correctly, obviously, because there was nothing wrong with my mind. But I could see him watching me carefully, looking for signs of confusion or disorientation that simply weren't there. Dr. Henderson, I said finally, what exactly did my children tell you? He hesitated. They expressed concerns about personality changes, social isolation, paranoid thoughts about family members. Did they mention that they've taken nearly $100,000 from me over the past 5 years without ever asking if I could afford it? No, they didn't mention that. Did they mention that they sold my house without telling me, or that they're trying to get legal control of my finances so they can access my Social Security? Another pause. No. Dr. Henderson, I'm not paranoid. I'm not confused. I'm being financially exploited by my adult children, and when I stopped giving them money, they decided to have me declared incompetent. That's not a medical condition. That's a crime. He finished his examination in relative silence, but I could tell he was reconsidering whatever my children had told him. When someone is clearly lucid and articulate, it's hard to maintain the fiction that they're delusional. At least, I thought it was hard to maintain that fiction. I was wrong. 2 weeks before the hearing, Michael called with news that sent my blood pressure through the roof. They found witnesses willing to testify about your mental state, he told me. What witnesses? I barely know anyone except my neighbors, and Carol would never. Not Carol. Other people. Your former hairdresser says you've been coming in confused about appointments, forgetting conversations. The clerk at the grocery store near your building says you've been buying inappropriate quantities of food, seeming disoriented about prices. I was speechless. None of that was true. I had been getting my hair done at the same salon for 2 years, never missing an appointment or forgetting a conversation. I shopped at the same grocery store every week, buying the same basic necessities I had always bought. Michael, none of this is true. These people are lying. I believe you. But the question is, why would they lie? That's when it hit me. Money. My children are paying them to lie. Can you prove that? No. But I can't prove they're not, either. This was the nightmare scenario. Not just my children lying about me, but strangers willing to perjure themselves for money. A web of lies designed to convince a judge that I was incompetent, when the only thing I was actually guilty of was finally standing up for myself. There's something else, Michael said, his voice grim. They've hired a psychiatrist to evaluate you. What kind of psychiatrist? The kind who specializes in geriatric cognitive decline. The kind who tends to see dementia everywhere he looks. My legs gave out. I sank into my kitchen chair, staring out at the lake without seeing it. Margaret, are you there? I'm here. I'm just processing. We're going to fight this. We're going to win this. But I need you to be prepared for how ugly it's going to get. Ugly? That seemed like an understatement. They're going to put you on the witness stand and try to make you seem confused or hostile or irrational. They're going to present a narrative where you're a sick woman whose own children are heroically trying to save her from herself. Even though the opposite is true. Even though the opposite is true. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hairdresser who was willing to lie about my mental state for money. I kept thinking about the grocery store clerk who was apparently going to testify that I seemed confused about prices when I had been shopping there without incident for years. How much had my children paid these people? How many other lies were they preparing to tell? And then I had a thought that made my stomach turn over completely. If they were willing to pay strangers to lie about me, what were they telling people who actually knew me? The answer came the next morning, in the form of a phone call from my granddaughter Emma. Emma was Sarah's oldest daughter, 22 years old and finishing her senior year at Northwestern. She had always been my favorite grandchild, the one who still seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with me, the one who called just to chat about her classes and her boyfriend and her plans after graduation. I hadn't heard from her since this whole mess started, which had broken my heart more than I wanted to admit. "Grandma," she said when I answered the phone. Her voice sounded strange. Careful. "Emma, sweetheart. I'm so glad to hear from you." "Grandma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My stomach clenched. "Okay. Are you sick? I mean, are you having problems with your memory or anything like that?" There it was. They had gotten to Emma too. "No, honey. I'm not sick. My memory is fine. Why are you asking?" A long pause. "Mom told me you've been having some issues. She said you've been acting paranoid and making accusations about the family, and that you might be developing dementia." "Emma, what else did your mother tell you?" "She said you accused her and Uncle David of stealing from you. She said you've been calling them and saying crazy things, and that you even threatened to call the police on them." The lies were spreading like poison through my family. My own granddaughter, who had known me her entire life, was being convinced that I was losing my mind. "Emma," I said carefully, "do I sound confused to you right now?" "No, but Mom said that people with dementia can seem fine sometimes and then have episodes where they get really paranoid and hostile." I closed my eyes. Sarah had done her homework. She had learned enough about dementia to plant seeds of doubt in everyone's mind, to make them question their own perceptions of my mental state. Sweetheart, I want to ask you something. In all the years you've known me, have I ever lied to you? No, grandma. Have I ever been anything but loving and supportive of you and your dreams? No. Then I'm asking you to trust me now when I tell you that I am not sick, I am not confused, and I am not lying about what your mother and uncle have done. Silence. Emma? Grandma, I don't know what to believe anymore. Mom is really upset. She's crying all the time, saying you won't talk to her, saying you hate the family. And Uncle David is talking about how you might hurt yourself if you don't get help. Hurt myself. Now I was supposedly suicidal too. Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am going to tell you some things about money, about what I have given your mother and uncle over the years. And I want you to remember that I have documentation for all of it. I told her about the $93,000. About the beach house sold without my knowledge. About the car sold to save David's mortgage. About my bank balances and my legal fees and the guardianship petition designed to give them control of my social security. I told her everything, keeping my voice calm and clear, presenting facts instead of emotions. When I finished, there was a long silence. Grandma, she said finally, if all of that is true, why didn't you tell us before? Because I thought they would stop. Because I thought they loved me. Because I thought family meant more than money. And you have proof of all this? All of it. Another long pause. Grandma, I think you need to know something. Mom and Dad are telling people that you've developed dementia and that you're making up stories about the family to justify your paranoid behavior. They're saying the kindest thing to do is get you into a facility where you can get proper care. What do you think, Emma? I think. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think you sound exactly like yourself. And I think if you were really developing dementia, you wouldn't be able to remember so many specific details about money and dates. Relief flooded through me. At least one person in my family was still capable of logical thinking. There's something else, Grandma. Something I probably shouldn't tell you, but I think you deserve to know. My heart stopped. What? Mom and Dad have been talking about selling your apartment after they get guardianship. They said the money would help pay for your care, but they've also been talking about using some of it to add on to our house and maybe take that European trip they've been planning. There it was. The final proof that their concern for my welfare was entirely fiction. They were already spending the money they planned to steal from me. Emma, I said, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to testify at my hearing. I need you to tell the judge what your mother and father just told you about selling my apartment and using the money for their own purposes. Silence. Grandma, I can't testify against my own parents. You wouldn't be testifying against them. You would be testifying for me. For the truth. But they're my parents. They support me. They're paying for my college. If I go against them in court. She didn't need to finish. I understood. Emma couldn't afford to tell the truth because she was financially dependent on the same people who were trying to destroy me. I understand, sweetheart. I don't want you to do anything that would hurt your future. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at nothing. My favorite granddaughter believed me, but she couldn't help me. She was trapped in the same web of financial manipulation that had controlled my life for years. That's when I realized something that almost broke me. I was completely alone. Not just legally alone, fighting this battle by myself, but emotionally alone. The people I had loved most in the world, the people I had sacrificed everything for, had systemically turned everyone against me to cover up their own crimes. I was 72 years old, with $600 to my name, facing a legal system that was predisposed to believe that elderly people who accuse their families of theft are probably confused and delusional. And the people trying to destroy me were my own children. That night was the darkest of my life. Darker than when my husband died. Darker than when I realized I was broke from helping ungrateful people. Darker than any night I had ever experienced. Because it was the night I finally understood that I had spent my entire adult life loving people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited and discarded. But it was also the night I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to fight. Not just to win the court case, but to reclaim my life completely. And I was going to start by doing something I had never done in my 72 years on this planet. I was going to stop caring what other people thought and start caring what I thought. It was going to be terrifying. It was also going to be the most liberating experience of my entire life. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in mid-November. The courtroom felt like a theater designed for my public humiliation, with my children and their lawyer sitting at one table, me and Michael sitting at another, and a judge who looked like she had already decided this was a waste of her time. I had spent weeks preparing, reviewing documents, practicing testimony, trying to steel myself for what Michael warned would be a brutal cross-examination designed to make me appear confused or hostile. But nothing could have prepared me for the systematic character assassination I was about to witness. Sarah took the witness stand first, dressed in a conservative navy suit that made her look professional and caring. She played the role of the concerned daughter perfectly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaking with what appeared to be emotion, "it breaks my heart to be here today. But my mother is sick, and she refuses to get the help she needs." She testified about my sudden personality change over the past several months, about my paranoid accusations against family members, about my irrational financial behavior and my isolation from people who loved me. "She used to be such a warm, loving person," Sarah said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But lately, she's become someone I don't recognize. Angry, suspicious, making wild claims about family members stealing from her." Every word was carefully chosen to sound reasonable and heartbroken. Every tear seemed genuine. If I hadn't lived through the reality they were depicting, I might have believed her myself. David's testimony was similar. More tears, more expressions of helpless concern, more vivid descriptions of my alleged mental decline. "She sold my sister's car without telling anyone," he testified. A valuable antique car that Sarah treasured. When we asked her about it, her explanation made no sense. She seemed to think we were part of some conspiracy against her. The psychiatrist they had hired testified next. Dr. Raymond Kellerman, a man who had never met me in person, had reviewed their petition and concluded that I was showing classic signs of paranoid dementia with financial disinhibition. "In my professional opinion," he said, "Mrs. Patterson is no longer capable of managing her finances or making rational decisions about her care. The paranoid accusations against family members, combined with inappropriate financial behavior, indicate significant cognitive impairment." Then came the parade of paid witnesses. The hairdresser who claimed I had been confused about appointments. The grocery clerk who said I seemed disoriented about prices. A neighbor I barely knew who testified that I had been acting strange and muttering to myself in the hallways. Each lie was delivered with apparent sincerity. Each false concern was expressed with seeming reluctance. They had constructed a narrative so comprehensive, so detailed, that it would have been easy for a judge to believe every word. When it was our turn to present our case, Michael did an excellent job laying out the financial evidence. The bank records showing the pattern of requests and transfers. The documentation of the house sale. The recordings of phone conversations where my children threatened me with forced institutionalization. But I could see the judge's skepticism. The financial exploitation was clearly documented, but that didn't necessarily prove I was mentally competent. Elderly people with dementia are often exploited by family members. The exploitation might be real, but that didn't mean I wasn't also genuinely impaired. When Michael called me to testify on my own behalf, I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. This was it. This was my chance to prove that I was the same person I had always been, just one who had finally found the courage to say no. "Mrs. Patterson," Michael began gently, "can you tell the court your full name and today's date?" "My name is Margaret Rose Patterson. Today is Tuesday, November 14th, 2023. And can you tell the court why you believe your children have filed this petition?" I looked directly at the judge, ignoring the people who had once been my family sitting at the other table. "They filed this petition because I stopped giving them money, and they want legal control of my Social Security income." "Can you explain what you mean by that?" For the next hour, I told my story. I explained about the decades of financial support, the sacrifices I had made, the gradual realization that I was being exploited rather than loved. I described the phone calls that had revealed their true motivations, the lies they had told about me to third parties, the systematic campaign to convince everyone I was mentally incompetent. I presented every fact calmly and clearly. I answered every question without hesitation. I provided specific dates, amounts, and details that would have been impossible for someone with dementia to remember accurately. But then my children's lawyer stood up for cross-examination, and I understood what Michael had meant about it getting ugly. "Mrs. Patterson," the lawyer began, "do you believe your children are involved in a conspiracy against you?" "I don't believe it. I know it. I have documentation." "Do you believe other people, like your hairdresser and the grocery store clerk, are also part of this conspiracy?" I saw the trap. If I said yes, I sounded paranoid. If I said no, I had to explain why they would lie without sounding paranoid. "I believe my children have paid people to lie about me," I said carefully. "Whether that makes it a conspiracy or just simple bribery is a matter of semantics." "So you believe multiple people have been paid to give false testimony about your behavior?" "Yes." "Including medical professionals?" If medical professionals have been paid to give false testimony, then yes. The lawyer smiled like I had just proved his point. Mrs. Patterson, doesn't it seem more likely that multiple people who know you well have noticed genuine changes in your behavior, rather than that your children have somehow orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy involving doctors, shopkeepers, and neighbors? It was a good question. A reasonable question. The kind of question that would make a judge wonder if I really was paranoid. What seems likely to me, I answered, is that people will say whatever they're paid to say, especially when they're told it's to help a sick old woman get the care she needs. Mrs. Patterson, are you aware that paranoid thoughts about family members conspiring against them are one of the most common early symptoms of dementia? Another trap. Acknowledging that I knew about dementia symptoms might suggest I was worried about having them. Denying knowledge would seem less credible. I'm aware that accusing elderly people of paranoia is one of the most common ways that family members justify financial exploitation. The cross-examination continued for another 40 minutes, each question designed to make me sound either paranoid or hostile. The lawyer was skilled at his job, and by the time he finished, I wasn't sure how I had come across to the judge. When we broke for lunch, Michael was cautiously optimistic. "You did well," he told me. "You answered every question clearly and specifically. You never sounded confused or disoriented. But do you think she believed me? I think she's taking this more seriously than she expected to. Your children's case is falling apart under scrutiny." He was right. When we returned from lunch, the judge announced that she wanted to hear additional testimony from some of the witnesses who had claimed to observe my confused behavior. Under careful questioning, their stories began to fall apart. The hairdresser couldn't remember specific dates when I had allegedly missed appointments. The grocery clerk couldn't provide details about what I had purchased that seemed inappropriate. The neighbor admitted under oath that she had never actually spoken to me, just observed me from a distance. Most damaging of all, Dr. Kellerman was forced to admit that his diagnosis was based entirely on secondhand reports from my children, not on any direct examination or objective medical evidence. "So you're diagnosing Mrs. Patterson with dementia without ever having met her?" the judge asked pointedly. "I'm offering a professional opinion based on the information provided to me," he replied defensively. "Information provided by people who stand to gain financial control if she's declared incompetent." "Yes, but, doctor, in your professional opinion, if someone wanted to fraudulently have an elderly person declared incompetent, what symptoms would they likely claim to observe?" Dr. Kellerman looked uncomfortable. "Well, they would probably claim paranoid thoughts, financial irresponsibility, social isolation, all of which are exactly the symptoms reported in this case." "Yes, but that doesn't mean—" "Thank you, doctor. That's all." By the end of the second day, it was clear that the judge was not convinced by my children's case. Their witnesses had been exposed as unreliable or potentially dishonest. Their medical expert had been revealed as someone willing to diagnose mental illness based on hearsay from financially interested parties. Most importantly, I had demonstrated under intense questioning that I was articulate, coherent, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. After reviewing the evidence presented in this case, she announced, "I find no credible proof that Mrs. Patterson is suffering from cognitive impairment or is unable to manage her own affairs. The testimony suggesting mental incompetence appears to be either unreliable or potentially fabricated." She paused, looking directly at my children. "Furthermore, the evidence strongly suggests that this petition was filed not out of genuine concern for Mrs. Patterson's welfare, but as an attempt to gain control of her finances after she refused to continue providing financial support." My knees nearly gave out from relief. The petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Patterson retains full legal capacity and all rights to manage her own person and property. But the judge wasn't finished. "I am also ordering an investigation into potential elder abuse and perjury in this case. The evidence suggests that false testimony may have been given, and that officials may have been misled about Mrs. Patterson's mental state." I watched my children's faces as the implications sank in. They had not only failed to gain control of my finances, they were now facing potential criminal charges for their attempts to have me declared incompetent through fraudulent means. As we filed out of the courtroom, Sarah grabbed my arm roughly. "I hope you're happy," she hissed. "You've destroyed this family over money." I looked at her, really looked at her, for what I realized would probably be the last time. "I didn't destroy this family, Sarah. I just finally stopped pretending we were one." David tried a different approach. "Mom, this doesn't have to end this way. We can work things out. We can go back to how things used to be." "No," I said quietly. "We can't. Because now I know how things used to be. And I deserve better than that. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something I had never experienced before, the vast, terrifying, exhilarating freedom of a life that belonged entirely to me. For 72 years, I had defined myself in relation to other people's needs. I had been someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother. I had measured my worth by how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice, how much I could endure. But walking down those courthouse steps on that crisp November afternoon, I was just Margaret. Not anybody's anything. Just me. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The months that followed were both the loneliest and the most liberating of my life. The investigation the judge had ordered led to criminal charges against the hairdresser and the grocery clerk for perjury. It also led to a very uncomfortable interview with Dr. Kellerman by the state medical board. My children avoided criminal charges, but only because proving they had directly paid for false testimony was difficult without cooperation from the witnesses, who had their own legal problems to worry about. The legal victory felt hollow at first. I had won the right to control my own life, but I had lost my family in the process. Or rather, I had lost the illusion of family I had been clinging to for so many years. The silence from my children was complete. No phone calls, no letters, no attempts at reconciliation. It was as if I had simply ceased to exist for them once my bank account was no longer accessible. Emma called once, about 2 weeks after the hearing. "Grandma," she said, her voice small and uncertain, "I just wanted you to know that I believe you. And I'm proud of you for fighting back." "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know. I can't see you right now," she continued. "My parents? They've made it clear that I have to choose between you and them, and I can't afford to lose their support while I'm still in school." I understood. Emma was young, still financially dependent, still building her life. She couldn't afford to alienate the people who were paying her tuition, even if they were wrong. "I hope someday, when things are different, we can have a relationship again," she said. "I hope so too, honey. But even if that day never comes, I want you to know that I love you and I'm proud of the young woman you've become." After that call ended, I cried for about 3 hours straight. Not just for Emma, but for everything I had lost. For the grandchildren who would grow up thinking I was the crazy grandmother who had tried to destroy their family. For the holidays that would be spent alone. For the family photos that would never be taken, the memories that would never be made. But when the tears dried, I realized something surprising. I also felt relief. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to worry about emergency phone calls requesting money I didn't have. I didn't have to walk on eggshells trying to maintain relationships with people who saw me as an inconvenience. I didn't have to pretend that being exploited was the same as being loved. I was alone, but I was also free. And slowly, carefully, I began to build a life that belonged entirely to me. Carol remained a steadfast friend throughout everything. She had testified at the hearing about my mental acuity and the attempts by my children to convince third parties I was incompetent. She had been there with tissues and tea during the worst moments of the legal battle. "You know what you need," she said one afternoon as we sat in my living room watching the snow fall over Lake Michigan. "You need to do something you've never done before. Something just for you." "Like what?" "I don't know. What did you want to do when you were young? Before you got married, before you had kids, before your whole life became about taking care of other people?" I had to think about it. It had been so long since I had considered my own desires that I had almost forgotten how to want things for myself. "I used to paint," I said finally. "Watercolors. I was pretty good at it, actually. But I stopped after Sarah was born. No time, no space, no money for supplies. So start painting again." "I'm 72 years old, Carol. It's been 50 years since I held a paintbrush." "So? You're going to be 72 whether you paint or not. Might as well be 72 and painting." That afternoon, we went to an art supply store. I felt like a fraud walking through the aisles, touching brushes and examining pigments like I had any right to call myself an artist. But Carol pushed me to buy a basic watercolor set, some paper, and a small easel. "This is ridiculous," I muttered as we stood in line to pay. "I don't even remember how to mix colors properly." "Then you'll learn again. Or you'll learn differently. The point isn't to be good at it right away. The point is to do something that makes you happy." When was the last time I had done something just because it made me happy? I honestly couldn't remember. That night, I set up the easel by my living room window and tried to paint the view of Lake Michigan. It was terrible. The proportions were wrong, the colors were muddy, the whole composition looked like something a child would bring home from elementary school. It was also the most fun I had had in years. Over the following weeks, I painted everything I could see from my apartment windows. The lake in different seasons and weather conditions. The buildings of downtown Chicago in the distance. The people walking on the sidewalks below, rendered as tiny, imperfect figures. None of the paintings were any good, but they were mine. Created by me, for me, with no purpose other than my own enjoyment. I also started volunteering at a senior center on the south side of Chicago. Carol had suggested it as a way to meet people and stay active, but it became much more than that. The center served elderly people who were struggling financially, many of whom had been abandoned or exploited by their own families. I started out just helping serve meals and organize activities, but gradually I began talking to people about my own experience. I met Rose, an 80-year-old woman whose son had forged her name on checks until her bank account was emptied. I met Harold, whose daughter had convinced him to sign over his house and then evicted him to sell the property. I met Maria, whose entire family had systematically stolen her Social Security checks for 3 years before she found the courage to report them. These people understood my story in ways that my former family never had. They didn't think I was being dramatic or paranoid or ungrateful. They recognized financial elder abuse because they had lived through it themselves. And they were surviving. More than surviving, they were rebuilding their lives, finding new sources of meaning and connection, discovering that being alone was better than being exploited. The hardest part, Rose told me one afternoon as we worked together in the center's community garden, wasn't losing the money. It was accepting that my son saw me as something to be used up and thrown away. How did you get past that? I asked. I realized that his inability to love me properly says nothing about my worth as a person. It just says something about his character. Her words hit me like a revelation. My children's treatment of me wasn't a reflection of my value as a mother or a person. It was a reflection of their own moral failings. For 72 years, I had been taking responsibility for other people's behavior toward me. If they were cruel, I must have deserved it. If they were ungrateful, I must not have given enough. If they were exploitative, I must have failed to teach them better values. But sitting in that garden, my hands dirty with soil, surrounded by people who had survived the same betrayals I had endured, I finally understood that some people are just takers. Some people see kindness as weakness and generosity as stupidity. Some people will drain every resource you have and then blame you for being empty. And that has nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with who they are. As winter turned to spring, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to travel. I had never traveled alone in my life. When I was young, I didn't have the money. When I was married, my husband wasn't interested in going anywhere. When I was raising children, I couldn't afford it. When they were adults, all my money went to their endless emergencies. But now, with no one to support but myself, with my rent and utilities covered by Social Security, with the small savings I had managed to accumulate by not funding anyone else's crisis, I could afford a modest trip. I chose Santa Monica, California. I had always loved the ocean, and the idea of warm sunshine in the middle of a Chicago winter seemed like the most luxurious thing imaginable. I booked a small hotel room 6 blocks from the beach. I bought a plane ticket. I made restaurant reservations for one without feeling embarrassed about dining alone. The night before I left, Carol came down to help me pack. "Look at you," she said, watching me fold sundresses and sandals. 6 months ago you were fighting for your right to exist, and now you're jet-setting off to California. Hardly jet-setting, I laughed. More like budget traveling to a moderately priced hotel. Still, you're doing something for yourself. Something that makes you happy. That's revolutionary for you. She was right. For most of my life, spending money on my own pleasure would have seemed selfish and irresponsible. There was always someone else who needed it more, always some crisis that took priority over my own desires. But there was no one else anymore. No one whose emergencies mattered more than my own happiness. No one whose approval I needed to purchase with constant sacrifice. Just me. And I was worth a trip to California. The plane ride was my first time flying alone, my first time doing anything entirely for my own pleasure. I sat by the window and watched Chicago disappear beneath me, then watched the landscape change from industrial Midwest to desert Southwest to California coast. When we descended into LAX, I saw palm trees and endless blue sky, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pure anticipation for what was coming next. The hotel shuttle driver was a chatty man in his 50s who pointed out landmarks as we drove through the city. "First time in LA?" he asked. "First time anywhere by myself," I admitted. "Well, you picked a good time to be here. Weather's perfect, beaches are beautiful. You're going to love it." And I did love it. Every single minute of it. I walked barefoot on the Santa Monica Pier at sunset, watching the Ferris wheel light up against the darkening sky. I sat on the beach for hours, reading books I had bought for myself, drinking coffee that I didn't have to share with anyone. I took the bus to art galleries and museums. I wandered through farmers' markets, buying exotic fruits whose names I couldn't pronounce. I sat in oceanfront restaurants eating meals I had ordered without considering anyone else's preferences. For 5 days, I lived entirely for myself. I woke up when I felt like waking up, went where I wanted to go, did what interested me. No one needed anything from me. No one was disappointed in my choices. No one was measuring my worth by how much I could give them. I was just Margaret, walking on the beach, painting terrible watercolors of palm trees, eating ice cream for breakfast because I was an adult and I could. On my last morning, I sat on the beach watching the sunrise and called Carol. "How's California treating you?" she asked. "Carol, I think I might be happy." "Might be?" "I think I am happy. Actually happy. Not pretending to be happy, not finding small moments of happiness in between other people's problems. Just happy." "Good," she said firmly. "It's about time. I keep waiting for it to feel selfish or wrong, but it doesn't. It feels like the most natural thing in the world." "That's because it is natural, Margaret. You just forgot for a few decades." Flying home to Chicago, I looked down at the country passing beneath me and realized that I wasn't the same person who had left 5 days earlier. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. Some long-held belief about my own worth had been quietly revolutionized. I was enough. Just me, by myself, with no one to take care of and no one to please. I was enough. The apartment I returned to looked different too. Not smaller or lonelier, but fuller somehow. Full of possibility. Full of potential for a life I was still discovering I could have. I hung my amateur California paintings on the walls next to the Chicago landscapes I had been working on. I rearranged the furniture to create better light for painting. I bought fresh flowers for the kitchen table, not because anyone was coming to visit, but because I liked the way they looked. For the first time in my adult life, I was decorating a space entirely according to my own taste, my own comfort, my own pleasure. It was a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. Spring became summer, and my new life continued to unfold in ways that surprised me. I joined a painting class at the community college. I started swimming at the local YMCA. I volunteered more hours at the senior center and began leading a support group for elderly people who had experienced financial abuse from family members. That support group became one of the most meaningful parts of my new life. Listening to other people's stories, sharing my own experience, helping people understand that they weren't alone in their pain, it gave me a sense of purpose I had never found in simply writing checks to solve other people's problems. "You saved my life," a woman named Dorothy told me after one of our sessions. She was 78 and had been systematically robbed by her grandson until she was nearly homeless. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was a terrible grandmother for not wanting to give him everything I had. "You're not crazy, and you're not terrible," I told her. "You're just learning the difference between love and exploitation. It's a lesson some of us have to learn the hard way." In July, Emma called. I almost didn't answer. Seeing her name on my phone brought back all the complicated feelings I had been learning to live without. The longing for family connection, the hope that maybe someone would choose to love me without conditions, the fear of being hurt again by people I cared about. But I answered. "Grandma," she said, and her voice sounded different. Older, more confident. "I know it's been a long time. I know I have no right to call you after everything that happened. You have every right, sweetheart. You're my granddaughter. I graduated last month. With honors. I got into graduate school, a full scholarship to study social work." "Emma, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. I wanted you to know because everything that happened between you and my parents made me think about a lot of things. About family, about what love is supposed to look like, about how people treat each other." I held my breath. "I've been doing some research on elder abuse for one of my classes. And Grandma, what they did to you, what they tried to do to you. It's textbook family financial exploitation. I'm so sorry I didn't see it at the time." Tears started streaming down my face. After all these months, someone from my family was finally acknowledging the truth of what had happened. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I know I let you down when you needed support. But I want you to know that I understand now, and I'm horrified by how they treated you." "Oh, Emma. Are you okay? Are you doing all right by yourself?" I looked around my apartment, at the paintings on the walls and the flowers on the table and the books stacked beside my reading chair. I thought about the senior center and the support group and the friends I had made. I thought about the trip to California and the painting classes and the swimming sessions that had made me stronger than I had been in years. "I'm more than all right, honey. I'm happy." "Really? Really?" For the first time in decades, I'm living a life that's entirely my own, and it turns out I quite like myself as company. She laughed, and it sounded like music. Would you maybe want to have lunch sometime?" I know things are complicated with my parents, and I don't want to make your life more difficult, but I miss you. I would love to have lunch with you, Emma. About you, I miss you too. We met the following weekend at a small cafe near Northwestern. Emma looked older, more mature, but she still lit up when she smiled. Still had the same infectious laugh that had made her my favorite grandchild. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her studies, her boyfriend, her plans for the future. I told her about my painting, my volunteering, my trip to California. You seem different, Grandma. Lighter, somehow. I feel different. I feel like I finally understand who I am when I'm not trying to be everything to everyone else. Do you ever regret it? Fighting back, I mean. Losing the family? I considered the question seriously. I regret that it came to that. I regret that your parents saw me as something to be used rather than someone to be loved. But I don't regret standing up for myself. And I don't regret discovering that I'm strong enough to build a life on my own terms. What about holidays? Don't you get lonely? Sometimes. But lonely by choice is very different from lonely because you're being ignored and exploited. One feels like freedom, and the other feels like abandonment. As we prepared to leave, Emma hugged me tightly. I want you in my life, Grandma. Not because I need anything from you, but because I love you and I respect who you are. That's all I ever wanted, sweetheart. Someone to love me without expecting me to buy that love. Will you come to my graduate school graduation in 2 years? Nothing could keep me away. That night, I called Carol and told her about lunch with Emma. See, she said. Real family finds its way back to you. The rest was just noise. Summer turned to fall, and I marked the first anniversary of my court victory by treating myself to another trip, this time to New England to see the fall foliage. I stayed in small bed and breakfasts, painted terrible watercolors of maple trees, and ate lobster rolls on the coast of Maine. I was sitting on a bench in a small Vermont town, sketching the local church, when an elderly man sat down beside me. That's pretty good, he said, nodding at my painting. It's pretty terrible, I corrected, but I was smiling. Maybe, but you look happy doing it. That's worth something. We chatted about art and travel and the beautiful day. His name was Frank, and he was recently retired from teaching high school history. We had coffee together, and when I mentioned I was staying at the same bed and breakfast he was, we ended up having dinner together too. You're traveling alone? He asked. I am. First time in my life, actually. Turns out I'm pretty good company for myself. That's the secret to everything, he said. If you can't enjoy your own company, you can't really enjoy anyone else's. We spent the rest of my New England trip exploring small towns together. Nothing romantic, just two people who enjoyed each other's conversation and humor. When it was time for me to fly back to Chicago, he asked if he could write to me. I live in Boston, he said. Not exactly next door to Chicago, but maybe we could stay in touch. I'd like that, I realized I meant it. Frank and I have been corresponding for months now. Letters, emails, occasional phone calls. He's planning to visit Chicago in the spring, and I'm thinking about visiting Boston in the summer. I don't know if it will lead to anything romantic, and honestly, I don't care. What I know is that I enjoy his company, and he seems to enjoy mine, and neither of us needs anything from the other except friendship and conversation. For someone who spent decades in relationships based on need and obligation, this feels like a miracle. It's been over a year now since my legal victory, and I haven't heard from David or Sarah once. No apologies, no attempts at reconciliation, no acknowledgement of what they put me through. At first, their silence felt like a constant ache. I would imagine conversations where they admitted their mistakes and asked for forgiveness. I would rehearse what I would say, how I would respond, whether I could trust them again. But gradually, the silence has become peaceful rather than painful. I no longer jump every time the phone rings, hoping it might be them. I no longer carry the weight of their expectations or their crises. Emma visits me regularly now. She brings her boyfriend sometimes, a kind young man who studies engineering and makes her laugh. They don't need anything from me except my company, and they seem to genuinely enjoy the stories I tell about my painting classes and my volunteer work and my travels. You know what's funny? Emma said during her last visit. I have more of a relationship with you now than I ever did when my parents were managing all the family interactions. How so? Before, every visit was orchestrated around their needs or their schedule or their agenda. Now it's just us, talking about things we actually care about. I know you better now than I did in 20 years of family gatherings. She was right. Our relationship now is based on genuine affection rather than family obligation. She chooses to spend time with me, and I choose to spend time with her, and that mutual choice makes every conversation more meaningful. Last month, I did something that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago. I treated myself to a professional portrait session. Why? Carol asked when I told her about the appointment. Because I want a picture of who I am now. Not who I used to be when I was defined by other people's needs, but who I am today. The photographer was a young woman who specialized in portraits of older adults. She understood immediately what I was looking for. I want you to see yourself the way the world sees you, she said as she adjusted the lighting. Strong, independent, vibrant. Not invisible the way our culture sometimes makes older women feel, but powerful and beautiful and worthy of celebration. When I saw the final portraits, I almost didn't recognize myself. The woman in the photographs looked confident, peaceful, complete. She looked like someone who had fought hard battles and won. Someone who had discovered her own worth and refused to accept anything less than respect. She looked like someone I was proud to be. I had one portrait framed and hung it in my living room, next to my amateur paintings and the flowers I buy for myself every week. It's a declaration of independence, a visual reminder that I am enough exactly as I am. Sometimes I catch myself looking at that portrait and marveling at the journey that brought me here. From the broken woman crying over a shattered coffee mug to the woman in that photograph who radiates self-possession and peace. It wasn't an easy transformation. There were nights when the loneliness felt overwhelming, days when I questioned whether standing up for myself had been worth losing my family. There were moments when I would have traded my new independence for the familiar comfort of being needed, even if that need came wrapped in exploitation. But those moments passed, and what remained was something I had never experienced before, a life that belonged entirely to me. Do I miss my children sometimes? Of course. I miss the people I thought they were, or the people they might have been if they had learned to love without calculating the cost. But I don't miss the constant anxiety of wondering when they would call with their next crisis. I don't miss the guilt of saying no or the resentment of always saying yes. I don't miss walking on eggshells to maintain relationships with people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. What I have instead is something I never knew I could have: self-respect. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing I am worthy of love and care, even if some people are incapable of providing those things. The peace that comes from living according to my own values rather than other people's expectations. I think about the woman I was 2 years ago, terrified and heartbroken, surrounded by the pieces of that broken coffee mug. She couldn't have imagined this life. She couldn't have pictured herself traveling alone, making new friends, creating art, building a support community for people who had survived experiences like hers. She couldn't have imagined that losing the approval of people who didn't really approve of her anyway could feel so much like finally coming home to herself. Tonight, I'm sitting by my living room window, watching the lights reflect off Lake Michigan, working on a watercolor of the winter sunset. It's still not very good, my technique remains amateur at best, but it's mine. Created by me, for me, with no purpose other than my own joy in making it. Tomorrow I'm having lunch with Frank, who is visiting from Boston. We're going to the Art Institute, and then we're cooking dinner together in my kitchen. Nothing romantic, nothing complicated. Just two people who enjoy each other's company sharing a meal and some conversation. Next week I'm starting a new volunteer position, teaching basic financial literacy to seniors who have been exploited by family members. Helping people understand that they have rights, that they deserve respect, that love should never come with a price tag attached. Next month, I'm flying to Seattle to visit a city I've never seen. I'll stay in a small hotel near Pike Place Market, eat fresh salmon, maybe try to paint the mountains on a clear day. This is my life now. Not perfect, not without challenges, but mine. Completely, entirely, authentically mine. And for the first time in 74 years, that feels like more than enough. It feels like everything. The hardest lesson I've learned in this journey is that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones least capable of seeing your value. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones most willing to exploit that love for their own benefit. But real family, the kind that matters, is chosen. It's Carol knocking on my door with coffee and concern. It's Emma calling to share her victories and her struggles without asking for anything in return. It's the community of survivors I've found at the senior center, people who understand my story because they've lived their own versions of it. It's Frank writing letters that make me laugh and bringing books he thinks I might enjoy. It's the photographer who helped me see my own strength and beauty. It's the art teacher who treats my terrible paintings with the same respect she gives to her most talented students. These people love me not because they have to, not because I'm useful to them, but because they choose to. And that choice, freely given and freely received, is worth more than all the obligations and expectations and manipulations that I lived with for so many years. If you're listening to this story and it sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in the woman I used to be, I want you to know something: you are not crazy. You are not paranoid. You are not ungrateful or selfish or wrong to want better for yourself. Love that comes with conditions isn't love at all. It's a transaction, and you deserve so much more than to be someone else's business arrangement. You are worthy of respect. You are worthy of kindness. You are worthy of people who see you as a person, not a resource. And you are stronger than you think. Strong enough to say no. Strong enough to walk away. Strong enough to build a life that belongs to you, even if it means disappointing people who never really had your best interests at heart anyway. The view from the other side of that courage is better than you can imagine. Lonelier sometimes, yes, but peaceful in ways that will surprise you. Free in ways that will transform you. You are enough. You have always been enough. And you deserve a life that reminds you of that truth every single day. Have you lived something like this? Do you know someone who has experienced this kind of family betrayal and found their way to freedom? Please share your stories in the comments. And if my journey touched you, if it gave you hope or courage or simply the comfort of knowing you're not alone, please like this video and subscribe. Your support helps me continue opening my heart, and it helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. You are worthy of love. Real love. The kind that doesn't come with a bill attached. Remember that. And never settle for less.